Welcome to Social Studies Samurai. In this video, we'll look at IB history concepts and how to apply them to your essay writing. So let's get started. Okay, this is IB history key concepts, but in somewhat normal language. And those are the concepts: change, continuity, causation, consequences, significance, and perspectives. And for example, when you're writing an essay in history for the IB, you might actually use more than one of these. In this video, we will look at an overview of the concepts. We're going to give some practical examples, and then we'll do a short quiz to check for your understanding afterwards. So change is essentially looking at the extent to which people and events have brought about change. So you might ask questions like, how do I know if significant change has occurred? Was there really a change here? How do you use evidence to prove or challenge claims or assumptions that have been made, or theories that a significant change has happened? And how can I better understand the content of a source to allow for a deeper understanding of what happened before or after an event? Because we're looking for change, right? So an example of change might be Germany's Weimar Republic, right? It was created after the First World War. It was politically unstable, and it didn't have strong democratic institutions. So that made it easier for the Nazis to exploit people's discontent, right? And undermine the process, or the democratic process. And that led to sweeping political change. So continuity, it's a little more frequent than you think. But basically, continuity can be a factor when we're studying history. We often look at change that is slow or maybe sudden. So you want to ask questions like, how can I identify when continuity has happened, even when there's change going on, significant change? How can you identify when historical change is actually less of a change and more a continuation of the past? And how can I question and assess whether continuity has really happened? Is this continuity? Or was this actually change? So here's an example. While women under Mao Zedong did receive more rights under the law, they continued to have less economic and political power than men. So yes, there was sweeping change when the communists came to power in 1949 in China, and there were changes to the lives of women. But some aspects of that did continue, such as... So causation. Obviously, we see this a lot, right? Basically, it's explaining how a series of circumstances happened. So, what things happened that led to some kind of, change or event happening. So you want to ask yourself, how do I recognize multiple and diverse causes of an event? Using evidence, how do you judge which causes were more significant than another? And you do this on IB exams a lot. You can't write everything, so if you're looking at causes of something, focus on the most significant ones. You have to know how to do that. How do I determine which causes were within the control of individuals or groups and which ones were not? Because sometimes cause is really out of someone's or a group's control. So here's an example of causation. Stalin's policies in the USSR of collectivization and industrialization, they were, for the most part, responsible for the Great Famine of 1932 to 33. However, the Great Famine was complex, and it had other factors that led to the famine, including drought, resistance to collectivization by the peasantry, poor agricultural practices, and suppressing any kind of criticism of policies, right? Now note the word here, it doesn't say cause, but it's responsible for. That means causation. So consequence is a little trickier than you might think, cause and effect, but essentially it's how forces have shaped people and societies. Looking at these things to see the outcome, the consequence, how those things came to be. And so you're going to ask questions like, in what way have significant events had both short and long-term effects? The effects meaning consequence, right? How can I use evidence to make interpretations of the choices people made or the choices groups made and events and how they unfolded? And how do I make judgments about the extent to which certain forces produced long-lasting and important consequences? And again, you can't write everything on an exam, so you have to figure out, which ones were important. So an example of consequence, the Treaty of Versailles. Nice one, right? And the political instability of the Weimar Republic in Germany contributed significantly to the rise of the Nazi Party and the establishment of the totalitarian regime. Now, I'm not going to read through everything here, but the idea is the Treaty of Versailles and political instability, they contributed to the rise of the Nazi Party, right? So, the consequence was the Nazis took power and established a brutal regime. But we're looking at the Treaty of Versailles and the weakness of the Weimar Republic that led to that consequence, that outcome. So significance basically is that record of the past that we have in evidence and what people have chosen to record and communicate, right? And we're looking at these things that are really important. So we want to ask questions like, how do I discover why something was recorded? Why did somebody, leave a record of this? How do you discover who's been left out and why? Because often we see history, but not from the lens of people that have been ignored by history, right? How do I address the importance of people, groups, events, and developments in history? And it's so hard because you have to choose when you're writing history what's significant. What are you going to put in there? How do you do that, right? How do you assess the evidence used by other people to make claims about historical significance? So in IB history, we're using a lot of textbooks and things like that and the work of historians. So how do you assess that when you're making claims about what was significant in the past? So an example of significance would be Mao Zedong's policies, like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. They had a profound and lasting impact on Chinese society and culture, and it shows how historical events and people in history can shape the course of history and leave a lasting legacy. So although Mao Zedong's policies did have mixed results, they had a significant impact on China's development. So history is essentially a selective narrative of the past. It's what people choose to tell you happened based on their perspective. They want us to think this is how history happened, and this can be used and abused. So you're going to ask questions like, how do I evaluate, critique, and challenge perspectives about the past? Because we will have different perspectives depending on who we are, where we were raised, and where we live, and how old we are, and all that stuff. How do I compare and corroborate perspectives about the past using historical evidence? And again, historians even have different perspectives about how the past happened. How do I discover multiple, contrasting, and differing perspectives about the past? If you want to, do history properly, you're going to look at multiple perspectives and evaluate them. And so how do I use primary sources and interpretations of historians to understand multiple perspectives of the past? If you really want to know the truth, you're going to be able to do this. So an example of perspective. The Cold War is often simplified as this geopolitical tension between the United States and the USSR. And it's got so many different historical interpretations. Those interpretations usually reflect the perspectives of the historian, their cultural background, their political climate that they grew up and researched and wrote in, and where they're writing from. So, for example, the domino theory and the U.S. fear of communism would be one perspective. Soviet aggression and expansionism would be another perspective, which would more likely be a Western one. And another one would be it's an ideological conflict between capitalism and communism, and that probably could be a perspective taken from anywhere. So how would you use these in your exam responses? First, as always, you have to understand the prompt, right? What is the question asking you? So focus on the command term and deconstruct the question. Determine the focus. Understand if it's a specific event or a period or if it's a theme that your question is. You want to identify key concepts, right? So what's the key concept in the prompt? Now, is it explicit, like change, significance, perspective? Or is there a synonym used, right? Because these words change, cause, consequence might not necessarily be explicitly in the question. It's implied. And you want to use these strategies, or you could use these strategies. Focus on the question, right? Ensure that your answer directly focuses on the prompt. Use specific evidence to support your claims. Use concrete examples and evidence. And make sure you analyze, don't just describe this happened, this happened, this happened. Give an analysis of what's going on. Give the historical context. This is where you might throw in multiple perspectives from different historians or schools of historical thought. So you show you're analyzing, not just saying what happened. Try to connect to broader themes. That helps too. Relate your analysis to larger historical trends or other concepts that might be connected. Okay, it is quiz time. Yay. So what's the concept? The Chinese Civil War is often attributed to a combination of factors including economic inequality, political corruption, and social unrest. What's the concept? It is causation. And attributed to a combination of factors is what tells me that, oh, I'm looking for causation here. What's the concept? The Cold War was not solely a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, but also included the non-alignment movement countries. This is perspective. And where it says was not solely, but also included, I'm trying to say that there were other perspectives here. There were other people involved in this. So what's the concept? Stalin's new economic policy, the NEP, led to post-war economic recovery, increased productivity, improved living standards, as well as greater economic inequality and challenges to communist ideals. We're looking at consequence here. And I get this from the led to, right? Stalin's new economic policy led to those consequences. All right, the Cultural Revolution was a period of intense social and political upheaval aimed to purge China of capitalist, traditional, and bourgeois elements, resulting in widespread chaos, violence, and destruction of cultural heritage. What's the concept? This would be change, right? Resulting in, that's my key word there, right? All that resulted in this. The Second World War accelerated the process of decolonization as European powers had to focus on the conflict and were unable to maintain their colonial empires, leading to the independence of many nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. What is the concept? This is significance, right? And I get this from the term accelerated. Accelerated is a pretty heavy word, right? And so that tells me that, okay, we're talking about significance here. This was important. Throughout the 1920s, under the Weimar Republic and under the Nazis in the 1930s, there was a recognition that economic recovery and international prestige were desired by the German public. What is the concept? This would indeed be continuity because there's something similar happening over time. Under the Weimar Republic and under the Nazis, two very different governments had very similar aims in some cases. It's continuity. Okay, so that's IB History Key Concepts, hopefully in normal language. Good luck, you got this, be prepared, you're going to be fine. Hope you liked the video. There's more on Instagram, Facebook, X, and on the web. Hope to see you again.